Hello folks, welcome to this webinar, the last in the series of developing a natural capital plan for Eastern England. You're in the right place. We will just hang around until we've got something approaching quorum, and then I will crack on in the traditional fashion. Hi folks who just joined us. We're just waiting to start this webinar, the last in the series, on developing a natural capital plan for Eastern England. We're watching people flow in, so we'll just hang around until we've reached something approximating our numbers, and then I'll crack on. It's been a little while since the last one, so I'm going to do a bit of a recap, but it's always a rather exciting stage, really.
Yeah, thanks to everyone who's been with us since the beginning as well. me and Sam were just reflecting that this is our 10th or 11th time together over the course of over 18 months. It's been fantastic to be a part of, and I hope you guys have enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, it's been a wild journey. It's kind of what I'm going to talk about in a minute as well. Is it's kind of nuts that when we started this, local nature recovery strategies weren't even a thing, and now suddenly, over the course of this plan, natural capital planning has become part of English law. So it's kind of it's been fascinating to been developing a plan with all the stakeholder engagement as this whole kind of world changes dramatically around us, which I could talk about for the entire length of this session, but I won't. I think it's a fascinating thing to be part of. Cool. I'm going to crack on, I reckon.
Yeah, let's
get started. So as normal, it's been recorded. So if you have any issues with that, bear in mind. Add questions in the chat, and after I've had a bit of a talk through, then I will take any and all questions that you have. So I'm sure all of you know who I am, Sam Sinclair from Biodiversify, and working with Water Resources East and WWF and the Coca-Cola Foundation on developing this plan. So as a very brief overview, I'm sure most of you have been here for most of this journey. We started off by looking at all of your projects, looking at everything that was going on and bringing together all the existing resources across the region. We then spent a good chunk of time talking about objectives and actions and getting from you very clear indication of what you wanted both from and for nature across Eastern England. We then set targets, which we did using stuff in the 25-year environment plan. And then we went through a series of iterations and reviewing the prioritization. So over the last 18 months, we've undertaken this process to develop this natural capital plan for Water Resources East. And this plan identifies where natural capital action can most cost effectively deliver targets, deliver this shared vision, this shared set of objectives and actions. And the intention of this plan, primarily, although it has multiple applications, is to support regional decision making. So this allows us to make decisions at this regional scale. So it allows us to compare between different areas. Which areas should we focus action in across Eastern England in order to get these achieve these objectives. Rather excitingly, this is the largest natural capital plan ever developed in the UK, and there are a lot of aspects of this plan that have been both novel and exploratory. It's been a highly exciting experience from my perspective because there are so many aspects of this which we've developed from scratch with stakeholder feedback as we've gone through, and this has been, I think, very much a learning exercise for everybody involved. And it's been largely possible because of the feedback we've had from the stakeholders. So the fact we've been able to do this, really novel thing, has only been, I think the thing that's really given it value is the fact that we've had very pragmatic, critical, and constructive feedback from stakeholders as we've gone through that have helped make sure that the stuff we're developing has actually been, fit for purpose. And as I mentioned, as I couldn't help myself from talking about at the start of this, that in the backdrop of this is the world of natural capital planning in the UK has developed considerably. So biodiversity net gain and the local nature recovery strategies are now in law via the Environment Act. And that's kind of progressed basically in parallel to this plan. I think when we first started doing this, I think I first heard the term local nature recovery strategy in early 2020. And now, since then we've worked on the pilots, which was based, our role in that was based largely on the lessons we'd learned from this process. And now, of course, we're starting to move into the phase where counties are actually going to start to be doing these things in practice, actually in a very meaningful way. So we've had a huge engagement from stakeholders. Attendance to webinars has been continuously really high, which has been really fantastic. We've had a huge amount of feedback and input and phone calls and emails and meetings and all kinds of different bits of information and support and critique and all kinds of information back from people. The analysis, of course, is based on the stakeholder submissions we gathered through the objectives and actions phase, which was 945 submissions, which are all still available on the WRE website. And these have formed the actual foundations of the plan. Everything that we've done since then has come directly from these objectives and actions. And actually, you can, if you're ever stuck for something to do, you can look at the Excel spreadsheet on the WRE website that details exactly how we've done that. And I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I think it's rather important to have a bit of a review as we're showing the final outputs here. We grouped the objectives into these natural capital categories. Here are the broad categories of biodiversity, water, flood control, general natural capital. And then we grouped the actions into biodiversity, climate, flood control, water quality, water supply, and a few others. But those 5 are the ones that really jumped out really clearly. One of the questions we've got asked fairly frequently early on was whether the fact that this was a natural capital plan developed in partnership with a water organisation gave us a water focus. But actually, I think we've now triangulated the fact that water and nature are so intimately connected, especially east of England, from multiple sources, that actually I'm very confident that this is not a reflection of WE's involvement, but actually reflections of the importance of linking together water and nature in eastern England. I think it's an absolutely critical issue. We use these objectives and actions to gather data, a vast array of data sources to identify potential areas for conserving good quality habitat, restoring degraded habitats, and establishing habitat in new areas. So this is a map of all the areas where you could create habitat across the whole of eastern England, collated into one massive data set by Julia and CISO. We've been working on this tirelessly. So once we collated all that information together, we then used cost to identify where do you act in order to get the outcomes you want in the most cost-effective way. We represented cost by combining a range of different data sources. Primarily, Knight Frank did some really good work for Farmers Weekly, identifying the relative cost of agricultural land in any given county. Combined it with CEH data on pastoral and arable land, and Natural England data, I believe it was, on the agricultural potential of any given area, which gives us the heat map on the left. We combine this with a very good paper, which gives us average costs of maintaining, restoring, and establishing habitat across, it's actually across the country, but of course, therefore, also Eastern England. Allows us to properly represent the costs in the cost effectiveness analysis that we ran. We got feedback from you on targets. The overall direction really was people would like ambitious targets. They wanted to set them high, which is actually something that very much chimes with our experiences doing county level plans. We've done 4 of those now, and consistently stakeholders, I think there's one quote that sticks out to me, which was a stakeholder was saying, rather than having low, medium and high, could we have high, very high and extremely high? So I think that's quite a kind of a shared ambition across multiple parts of the country. And we use this input to set targets. So we use the 25-year environment plan to do these, which is a bit of an adaptation of its original purpose, but I think it's the best guidance we can get for setting targets in this regional way. And this bit down the right here is the track that we used from the plan. For conserve, the targets for that, we set it at 80% of the potential, so to conserve at least 80% of existing good quality habitat, which when you consider all the development and various other things that are going to be happening in East England is actually a very high target. and that's based on both UK experience and international experience. This isn't explicitly laid out in the environment plan, but we used it based on, like I said, a wealth of prior experience. Restore, we use this tract here to set a target of restoring 75% of the degraded or low quality habitat across eastern England, restoring favourable condition. Establish was a bit trickier because there's a few different bits about this in the environment plan, and none of them are actually as clear as you might think. You read them at first and you get one implication, and you read them again and actually realise there's kind of some interpretation required. So the first one is priority habitat. It suggests creating or restoring 500,000 hectares of wildlife-rich habitat outside the protected area network. So proportionally across eastern England, this is which is 22.3% of the country. This gives us 115,000 hectares. We subtracted the restore target from this, which is around 44,000 hectares, I think, to give us 75,000 hectares. So that means that we'd be creating 75,749 hectares of priority habitat as the established target. But there's also woodland, which is confusingly dealt with separately. Now, one interpretation would be you'd include woodland within that target. However, because people said they wanted higher targets, we included it as a separate target. Now, what we originally did was set this at 12%, which is in line with the first line. And that's because that box there highlights it says increasing woodland in England in line with our aspiration of 12%, which would involve planting 180,000 hectares. Now, would involve is a bit ambiguous, so we originally went with 12%. In the review phase, someone came back and very rightly pointed out that actually currently national woodland is around 10%. So bringing it from 10% to 12% is probably only around the 200, probably just over 200,000 hectares across England. So fairly near the 180. Whereas our original target was we set 12% woodland cover in eastern England, which ended up being, I think, 215,000 hectares. So actually an extremely high target that actually didn't really reflect the original spirit of the 25-year environment plan. And that's a completely reasonable thing to do. I think we're very justified in doing it, but the review process revealed that actually that ended up with an overall target for England of much higher than 12%. So we decided to go with the other bit of 180,000 hectares, even though it's, like I said, it says would involve. So it's not a 100% match, but it's a fairly good place to go from. So we revised this to a proportion of 180,000 hectares to give us 41,000 hectares target for woodland creation. This reduces the established zone quite considerably. However, it's only really the woodland, the vast majority of it is the woodland that gets decreased. So actually I think this gives a slightly stronger product because it means that now we'll be able to identify priorities that are reflecting the correct proportion of priority habitat to the various different types of woodland. So that's an excellent explanation of why you might see a difference, or there is a difference, in the established zone. I'm putting the targets up here just to remind you of the kind of how we went about this and illustrate this a bit more. So on the left, you have these three columns of conserve, restore, and establish. This identifies in the conserve zone all the good quality habitat. How much good quality habitat is there in East England? Restore is how much degraded habitat there is in East England. Establish is the areas where it's currently farmland or something else, but where there's an opportunity to create habitat. So conserve, we basically literally took that number and said 80% of that. Restore, we took 75% of that number. And established, we divvied up the targets for both woodland through repairing woodland potential and through priority habitats according to the potential across them all to keep those targets. All of this is detailed in the final plan itself, which will be shared later today. It goes into a lot more detail. You can actually pass through it in your own time. So the outputs we get look a bit like this. So on the left-hand side, we have the single best solution. So the way the analysis we use runs is it asks the same question of where should we act in order to achieve the outcomes we want in the most cost-effective way. Ask that question millions of times using a complicated process called simulated annealing, which essentially goes through and selects individual parish planning unit at random and asks, will adding this parish to the habitat network of the actions within that parasitic habitat network. And asks you if our targets cost effectively, yes or no. And it asks that question millions of times until it gets a peri-optimal solution. And the single best solution is the one on the left. And the map on the right indicates the selection frequency. So this asks us how many times, this represents how many times was any given planning unit selected as part of the solution. So the ones that are black were selected every single time, so they're critical. The ones that are white were selected no time, so they're not particularly relevant. And then the ones that are in the middle are showing there's some choice there. These may be, more or less important areas. And the map on the right is a really important one because now we've started moving to actually using this tool to help us make decisions. This selection frequency allows us to identify the relative importance of any given area to the wider perspective, to the wider vision. So it allows us to say, what is the kind of landscape implication of acting or not acting in this area to any given slot, which is a really, really helpful piece of information when making these decisions that have more broad-reaching implications. But I'll talk about that in a minute. Apologies, my son is vigorously fighting nap time in the background, so if you can hear some noise in the background, that is an unhappy teddy. So for the restore, we get a similar map. So on the left, you've got selection frequency, including some prioritized for connectivity. And you'll notice that single best solution on the left. On the right, you have the selection frequency. And what you'll notice here is the map is a lot more, there's a lot less black, and there's a lot more purple. And this tells us that there's quite a lot of action that could be taken all over the place, and actually there's quite a lot of choice. So this is a really important thing to note because it means that even though we might get a single best solution that pulls out some as the single best solution, actually there's opportunity everywhere. There's almost nowhere that you can't be doing something. There's always nowhere that cannot contribute something important to this wider vision. And actually that implication needs to be borne in mind when we're thinking about what to do where. And the established one, and this is the one I noted that we've reduced the woodland aspect of this, is again quite polarized. This one's unusual. It's the areas which are quite black and white, essentially, saying there are areas that are really critical and areas that are less critical. Now this is very useful information because this tells us that actually there is less choice and there are more priorities. And area down in Essex, for example, is really critical. Actually, that's an area where action needs to happen, surrounding Thetford Forest, for example. Now this is, again, very helpful for decision making. This allows us to be quite clear that actually some areas are more important than others. So this is our consolidated results, and you'll see the map on the left there. The main difference you might notice is there are now, it's identified some more specific priorities. There's less kind of an action spread everywhere, which is this reduction in the woodland target. But I think it's actually more helpful because it allows us to say these areas are of particular regional significance. These areas are really critical to contribute to this regional vision. This is particularly important because now we're thinking about this in the perspective of local nature recovery strategies. And what we're finding is that in every county we work, there's a real ambition to set the targets high. So there's a real strength in being able to say, okay, we want to set our targets high or wherever we want to set them. But these are areas which are not just important from a Norfolk, Suffolk, Cambridgeshire perspective. These are areas that are important from a regional perspective. They're particularly important. And I think that's a really valuable thing to be able to say, and I think that's going to prove to be quite significant as this whole field develops. Right, implications. So Rachel Gibbs has asked what are the different colours. So I'm going to answer a couple of questions there quickly. First from Tim Papworth, which is, I still find this process frustrating because you cannot create ancient woodland. So this is a common issue. You are absolutely correct. You cannot create an ancient oak, a 500-year-old oak, but you can create buffers around ancient woodland. So the definition of ancient woodland includes these buffer areas around them because Natural England Natural England is aware of the importance of augmenting and supporting these existing areas of natural woodland. So you can create buffers where you already have existing woodland. You can create buffers around them of the same habitat makeup that will then support the ancient woodland that currently is there. So that's a common confusion there, but actually you can't correct. Yes, it's an important thing to note in the habitat definition. For Rachel, what different colours mean in the map? I think probably the easiest thing, we'll send you out the the maps and the map pack this afternoon. You can go through it, and there's a key that breaks it all down for you. So implications. So primarily, this thing represents a shared vision that draws on stakeholder input very clearly to say what people want in East England, but uses the guidance of policy, the 25-year environment plan, to identify a kind of clear blending of these two different inputs supported by ecological evidence to identify what can be achieved if we work together across Eastern England. It identifies regional priorities. So this is a really important thing to note. This highlights where are the most important areas from a regional perspective. And the key here is that it's this broader regional perspective. Many of the counties I know have different ambitions, and some of them quite rightfully quite high ambitions. And I think that there's a really key thing here to be thought through about how the local nature recovery strategies build on these regional perspectives to go, actually, we want to do more than the 25 environment plan lays out. We think we can achieve better than this. And I support that 110%. A key aspect of this, of course, will be informing water resource planning. As many of you know, the plan came out yesterday. I got it this morning and a quick flick through. And this SCP output is going to be a key component, I think, of this wider resource planning process. Now we have all the pieces together on the table. Another key implication is that this presents an opportunity to support local nature recovery strategies. I'll talk more about this in just a second, but the Environment Act is asking counties to develop these local natural capital plans. And I think that this regional tool has the opportunity to provide a very powerful supporting product for making sure that these are as effective and as well connected as they can possibly be. Primarily, however, though, this also identifies opportunities for cost-effective action, which is a really critical evidence base for investors and actors at all levels. And I think this is an avenue that I'm particularly interested in exploring over the coming months, because for me, this isn't going to be the end of the process. It's going to be actually, in many ways, the start of moving into right, how do we make this happen? How do we get money into people's hands? How do we get investment? How do we get action? How do we get farmers engaged? How do we get charities engaged? How do we get actual muddy boots, basically? And so there's a few examples I want to talk you through. So we've been using the outputs of this regional plan to support the development of a reservoir in South Lincolnshire. So I've been working with Anglian and Affinity Water in this process. And essentially what we did was work with stakeholders to develop a county level natural capital plan that is basically using the methods that we used, both a combination of the methods we used from this WRE plan, but also the pilots we did with DEFRA for the local nature recovery strategies. So we essentially created an LNRS for Lincolnshire that drew from this regional plan. And this provides a landscape perspective for their decision-making process. So this has allowed Anglian Affinity and their design team and all the stakeholders to work together to identify what are the landscape implications of different site choices of putting the reservoir in different places. And there's choices of different designs and different options and different formats of natural capital action. And critically, this was a really exciting opportunity for us because it was actually putting the rubber to the road. We're actually using these plans to provide advice for this, what is going to be a massive project. I think it's 5 kilometers squared is the surface area, which is a huge infrastructure undertaking. And what we did was we wove the DEFRA metric in and used it to interpret the outputs of this plan so that you then get a very clear indication of indication of the different implications of development choices. And the thing that's interesting for me is that this is exactly the same for a reservoir as it would be for housing development, as it would be for road development or desalination plants or all the other kinds of things that are going on, many of which, of course, WRE is going to be a key part of. So what we've established here is a method for using an LNRS, which draws from the regional plan, so it's working within that, but that it also can be used in a really direct way to provide implications from a landscape perspective and a biodiversity net gain perspective, the implications for development. So you get really helpful decision support outputs, metrics, and all kinds of things. It's a very generous analysis in those terms for figuring out where do we build stuff so that we reduce the impact on our network, both in terms of its current form and in terms of its potential. So we don't want to take away the potential of what could be created. And then also, as part of that, not just reducing impact, where can we find the most opportunity? Where can we make sure that biodiversity net gain efforts go in and really contribute the absolute maximum they can to nature in our region? I could talk about this for days, but I won't. Partly because I can't talk about any more of this as I'm under NDA, but I can talk about it at this loose level. Another key example here is supporting Water Resource East. So this Natural Capital Plan provides a key component of the environmental ambition. The environmental ambition is a combination of multiple things, of course. It's about flow, it's about streams, it's about water resource management. But this plan, I think, will provide quite an important element of it. And as a key contribution of this is it helps you identify where to focus environmental benefits through changes in abstraction. So where should flow be prioritized in order to deliver the maximum benefit? If you're going to have to pick between which rivers get water restored and in what order and what priority, this allows you to go, right, where are the pots that you're actually going to get the absolute maximum benefit from doing that? It can also be used to assess the relative impact of different scenarios. So once we have some very clear scenarios on the table, we can use this to go, right, what does this actually mean for nature? What will that actually lead to in terms of outcomes? And a key thing here is we can potentially, I don't want to promise this because it's always complex, but this is the sort of place where we can do things like bring in the DEFRA metric to actually start to kind of contextualize some of these things. Although I do always have to highlight that the DEFRA metric's intended for site level decision making. There's also an opportunity here to use catchment level planning that directly coordinates this regional ambition. So in the same way that you can use SCP like Russian dolls at the county level, you can also use it at the catchment level using essentially a geographic definition rather than an administrative one, which can help make sure that action happening in those local areas is directly connected in support of this regional vision. Another key opportunity here is to use these outputs to help support local nature recovery strategies. As I've already said, I've already said this, I've slightly jumped the gun on this because I'm very excited about this. The fact that natural capital planning and biodiversity net gain is now enshrined in law, I think is going to be absolutely transformative. I studied literally how LNRSs were used in South Africa, and they were very influential there. So I'm very excited to see what the future holds for this. And a key part of this for me is that there is an opportunity for Eastern England to really shine here. So we worked with DEFRA to trial the LNRSs. We've now developed 3 or 4, if you include the one for Lincolnshire, local nature recovery strategies. So we've learned quite a lot about what makes them successful and what the challenges and hiccups are. And 2 of the key challenges are setting ambitious yet practical targets. It's really hard to set targets. Everyone always wants everything to be as high as possible. But actually, we need to have targets that are ambitious but also practical. If we set targets that are going to convert 80% of the area to nature, well, I think a lot of people are going to have something to say about that. Not least, and very rightfully, the NFU. They may point out that actually, food is quite important to our society and various other things, way of life. So there's a really important role here, I think, for this regional plan to help figure out what is the right level of ambition that's still extremely exciting and ambitious, but that also is practical and can be used in a really pragmatic way, essentially. The other aspect here as well is coordinating across boundaries. Something that Eastern England's going to have a huge advantage in is this map helps identify how does Norfolk work with Suffolk, how does Norfolk work with Suffolk, but also Cambridgeshire or Lincolnshire, who, even though they might seem, county or so away, are actually part of the same system, and actually coordination across them is going to be mutually beneficial, especially as in some cases they have shared rivers. So I think there's going to be a real advantage in having this interlinkage. The plan also provides counties with this kind of interconnected reflection of the 25-year environment plan. Now, obviously, in many cases, they're going to want to be more ambitious than that, which is fantastic. But this gives you a really good starting point because you can see what does the 25-year environment plan mean for my area. Is that what I want, or is it more? Or what do I think about that? And that information, I think, will give you something to work from that I think will be quite influential and quite helpful from my experience. So critically as well, this provides an opportunity for SCP to provide clear links between county level planning and all the other things that are linked in with WRE. WRE has been, I would say, very successful in drawing together many different components. So by linking to this regional plan, that allows you to therefore have this thread through to water resource management planning and all the other stuff that Robin and his team have been so successful in connecting together. And then the last bit is connecting investment delivery. So this is kind of possibly the most interesting part. How do we get this all paid for? How do we get this translated into action? How do we, make this actually happen? An SCP here is designed to support cost-effective action. That's its purpose, which was originally designed for helping people figure out where to buy land as part of their nature reserves, but actually is extremely well suited to supporting both investors and delivery partners. And by that I mean, it could be their SPB, could be farmers, could be someone working with farmers to form agreements. So we're now, by Diversify, thinking really quite hard about how to use SCP to provide these interlinked decision supports. How can you have a single plan, whether it's at the regional, parish, county, catchment scale, that someone can look at from a strategic perspective and figure out where they should spend their money and how they should invest, but that also can be used to help someone who's making on the ground decisions about, how much is a fair rate for a farmer and how do they negotiate with that and what's appropriate to do where and how do you bring that local knowledge in. Ideally, these are two sides of the same coin. These are two bits of information that should be working together but drawing from the same plan. And so we're working very hard on thinking about how to use these plans to enable this and support it and get stuff moving, essentially. How do we get people working from the same plan to actually deliver this stuff? I can't talk too much about this at this point because there's lots of NDAs, basically. But this is something where we hope to have something quite exciting to be talking about over the coming months. Yes, I should probably stop there before I get in trouble. So the next steps, one of the most important steps for me, obviously we've finished this project now. This is the kind of final episode in this series, but it's not the end of the work. One of the things I'm really keen to be doing now is making the plan easy to access. We've got at the moment, of course, you can get the glossy kind of PDF, but there's also, you can go onto the website and download the data behind it, the actual outputs. But I really appreciate that a massive great spreadsheet is not that accessible to anyone who's not highly technical, including me. So one of the things we're working towards is developing an online portal which will allow people to easily access these results. Actually go on and see, what does this mean for me in my area? This is something we're thinking about really hard because I think this is really critical. We need to establish a clear role in the WRE regional plan. We've got this foundation, obviously this report's just dropped, the initial plans come out. And I think it's really going to be important to make sure that SCP is woven into that in a really structured way. The key next step, of course, is to get the money, work with investors and on-the-ground partners to source funds and deliver action. SCP is, like I said, designed for this. So we're now working pretty hard to try and make this happen, to try and make sure this tool actually gets used to channel money through to the place it needs to go. And of course, the other thing is, a key next step is to use this plan to support natural capital planning across Eastern England and really make sure that when people think of what a successful NRS looks like in a few years, they're looking at Eastern England. I want to make sure that the absolute maximum benefit from this is drawn out for everybody working in this area. And I think the next couple of years are going to be extremely exciting in this area. And obviously, as a natural capital planner, I'd say that. But I think generally from an English kind of nature perspective, water perspective, farming perspective, this is a highly exciting time. That's probably enough of me waffling on. So I think it's probably a good idea to take some questions. I'm going to go through the ones in the Q&A in the chat. Right. We've also got Rachel on the line to answer any questions about water resource planning stuff. So we've got a question from Claire Higson, which is, do you have the possibility to have the water resource zones overlaying? That's an incredibly good question. I think what I might do is take that question, and I'll ask CISO and Julia to note it down, because that's exactly the kind of thing that we're thinking about at the moment as we start to think about this visualization. How do we make stuff accessible? How do we bring these things together? And that's a really, really good point. So Luke has said it's really interesting how you can combine these outputs of the DEFRA metric, which could be useful for water resource management plans that need to convey how they show opportunities for biodiversity net gain. Yeah, absolutely. So this for me is the kind of the pointy end of this. You can use these outputs to help figure out where to avoid impacts, so to reduce your impact on biodiversity, but also reduce your biodiversity net gain obligations. But then also how to focus efforts. Where should you invest in nature in order to achieve biodiversity net gain as cost effectively as possible, and in a way that delivers the most. So you're not just planting some trees for their own sake, you're actually planting some trees that reduce flooding and increase connectivity and support species and all this kind of good stuff. So you're really getting the best bang for your buck. Do cut in at any point, Rachel, if you wish to. Otherwise I shall plough on. Darren says, looking forward to seeing the online portal. Any idea on timeframes for this? So I hope to have something out in the first half of this year, or at least something that people can be seeing. It's a bit difficult to say because it's also new, to be honest. No one's really done this in the UK before. So soon, I hope. It's the thing that I'm thinking about half the time, to be honest. It's right in the front of my mind. So as soon as we have stuff we can talk about, we will. And what I might even do is ask WRE very nicely if we might continue using this forum to talk about it, depending on what they think.
Do you want me to come in here, Sam?
Yes.
No, absolutely. And I mean, it is, I think, because, I mean, even for us at WRE, and we've worked over the year with Sam, it is such a unique area. It's been done obviously around the globe, but actually making it relatable to a farmer on his land, to a county council, to all our members that we have, our diverse membership that we have. And so I think WRE definitely are ideally placed to progress the next steps. And we have discussed, and there are many options, and we've kind of just taking a breather after launching our emerging plan yesterday. We can't stop there for one day. It's right, next level, or next steps to our autumn draft plan. And a huge part of that will be the local focus. And we held local focus workshops last year as sort of a data collection exercise of all the great stuff that's out there, and all the data that's out there, kind of collating it from our perspective. So now we have even more projects that probably and other areas that actually didn't get into the original SCP. So now it's looking at really focusing down on how are we going to run those kind of local focus workshops, but that will form the other half of the plan. We have at the moment, which you will see in the emerging plan, the big infrastructure options. But what we're missing, and what's going to really make that change, is those local options, those local demand measures, but also water demand measures, but also those local water supply options. And of course, a big part of that is as Sam mentioned, what's called the environmental destination parts. How much are we leaving how much water are we leaving in the environment? And so that will really set us apart in terms of how we use that. And of course, having a framework like SCP is a huge advantage, and the fact that it's helped shape the local nature recovery strategies as well. So, but how do we use that on a local level? And I know that we've also explored looking at it from and there's potential to look at it from a land manager pilot. So how would we use it at that level? But also, how could we make it easy for everybody to take the plan as it is, which is a regional plan, and go, right, how can I use it? And that will be the platform. And it is a great, everybody wants it now, because it is exciting, but people want, fed up of talking, they want to get on and do it, but do it in a regional, looking at it from a regional picture, obviously will, as you've mentioned, there's benefits to funding it. So if you're a local landowner or farmer, for example, actually getting the money to do what you want to do, which will benefit beyond your estate, of course, to those that are looking to where's best for either the investors that I'm advising, or if you're an investor yourself. So that's a long kind of, we're really excited about it. There are other projects, as you know, that we're working on, and we're just now with some of our membership looking at what or how many local focus areas should we start piloting or start looking at for all these questions that we need answers for. And I do think, and we had a conversation this morning, I think it's potentially beyond just work that's already going on at a local level. So we've got work, Water for Tomorrow, for example, is looking at 3 catchments, but that's quite a structured framework. Why don't we take the opportunity of using the SCP in different areas? So we're starting to come up with different approaches and looking at what's working, what can we learn from each other. So maybe that's one option, but our membership, our planning task and finish group are going to help us work that through. So there's huge opportunities. I think having something tangible in a platform will make that much easier as well. So we need to look at that as a kind of a priority, I guess.
Thanks, Rachel. It's a really exciting time, really. Like, in funny way, it's a weird one, because in some ways this is the end of the kind of first phase of this project, and in other ways it's the beginning. I think part of this. Sorry.
I was just thinking, but the unique, having the reach of our membership, I think is a great advantage.
That's the thing that's key for me. I totally agree, and I think that this is. I mean, I can see some of the questions here. How is working with WRE help the project, and what roles could WRE play in the next steps? And I think that would be my answer, is that at the moment there aren't that many structures for getting stakeholder feedback and bringing people together like we have with Water Resources East. And the other regions have taken different approaches, for example. And I think that strength is an incredible one. I think being able to say, actually, this analysis comes from 945 submissions from the WRE stakeholders who've all critiqued it and helped design it through the process is really powerful. So for me, that's something that basically WRE is one of the only organizations in the country capable of providing that role. I think that's incredibly exciting. So for me, that then means that my ambition would be that this is used to generate investment and direct it and guide it, help development, all that kind of thing. But that means doing hand in hand with WRE, because it means that this is about trying to implement this stuff in a way that links with what stakeholders want. So you never lose that thread, you never lose that connection with stakeholders. So that then which helps everybody really, it means that stakeholders get something they want, they have a voice in all this. But also from the perspective of someone investing in natural capital, they get cost-effective outcomes that they know are going to be aligned with what other organizations and people are interested in. You're not going to have the situation where you have conflicts, where they're planting trees in peatland or whatever it might be. So I think that's actually very much to everyone's benefit. So that's something that has really been tremendously exciting for me. And I think that's one of I think there's multiple roles that WRE and Biodiversify could play kind of working together. That for me is one of the most important ones. Andy has asked, how do we keep SCP live into the future as projects are delivered and new priorities arise? So the cool thing about this is once we do the analysis, which we have, it's very easy to read. Well, I say fairly easy to rerun it. Julian Cecil won't thank me for saying that, but it is fairly easy to rerun it as the information becomes available. So as projects are developed and investment starts to happen. So this will allow us to use information from multiple sources. So it could be from the local nature recovery strategies. This could be from projects telling us. This could be from the water resource management plan being executed. Exactly how that's done is an open question for me. There's multiple ways this could go. This could be we develop an online portal that then SCP is WRE is one of the kind of facets of this, one of the users of it potentially, or the WRE plan is one of the things people can access through this portal. So that's one option. Another option is that we then have it all interlinked. So it starts, this is a regularly updated thing that people can access as it develops. To be honest, we're still exploring a lot of this, so I don't want to promise anything because I can't, I can't say with particular confidence as we're still figuring out what exactly is possible and what people are interested in. But I guess for me, the simplest answer to that question is how do we keep SCP alive in the future is to continue the discussion, is to make sure this conversation is continuing and actually is discussed in a forum like this, so that as things happen, there is a place where people can come critique and ask questions. And I think the number of questions we've had is a testament to considerable engagement over the last, gosh, Lord only knows how many questions I've answered over the last 10, 11 webinars, and I can definitely tell you that it's a huge effect on the direction of the project. It's been very much, we have changed things dramatically based on stakeholder input. And he's also asked, with the addition of the DEFRA metrics, does the SCP constitute a true natural capital baseline map for the region? Wouldn't say that. I think we're using the best available data for natural capital in the region. I'm always very cautious about baselines. I mean, we have a baseline, we absolutely do. But one of my cautions about baselines is that they are often not very useful in decision making. If you are making decisions across a regional scale, having higher, better quality data, yeah, it might be useful, but it's not always actually as useful as you might think. The areas that have been highlighted that are bright green on that map, they're not likely to change. If we have kind of much higher quality data, it's very unlikely to shift it. So as more data becomes available, fantastic. As more data can be added to the baseline that we already have, fantastic. But I think it's more important to go a step beyond the baseline to identify priorities, because identifying where you act is about values. It's about going, how do we get the things we want, these objective actions, in the most cost-effective way. Peter Lanzoff has asked, who owns the land identified for action and how do we get them to cooperate? So this is a really, really important point. What this map is identifying is opportunities. So these are opportunities saying if you act here, if you work with the owner or the manager of this land to act in this place, you'll get a cost-effective outcome. So this isn't about forcing anyone. This isn't about making anyone cooperate. This is more about going, who do you speak to first? And how do you make sure you can come to them with the best possible price? How do you make sure you can come to them with a price that makes sense for both the person giving the money and the person receiving the money? And if there are farmers or land managers who have no interest in this, that's absolutely fine. That's not a problem in the slightest, and in no way should they be antagonized or forced to do anything they wish to do. Rather, the conversation should go along the lines of, here is an opportunity where if money becomes available, this should be an opportunity for you. This might be a way to augment your existing business or to adapt the way you operate. So it's very much about collaborative, open conversation and about people who want to work on this. Alan has said it'd be useful to have a pilot exploring opportunities for habitat enhancement in chalk stream headwaters. Yes, I totally agree. Yes, I agree. That would be very helpful. I think one of the key things here for me is going to be trying to figure out how to bring all the information together as it develops. So, the learnings from the Investment Readiness Fund projects, from all the other projects that WRE has going, and bring this together so that we end up with something that actually can build on all this and actually get something that's very increasingly accurate. One of the nice things about SCP is you can adapt things like the cost layer, for example, as you learn more about what implementation actually costs, about what actually is a fair rate for farmers. We can use that to replace the cost layer with something that reflects practice, reflects the actual reality for farmers. So something I'm quite keen on is seeing how this stuff evolves as more information becomes available. Someone has asked if the data is open to all parties. At the moment, all the data we're using is publicly available data from Natural England and various others, and is available to everybody. I think the only constraint is we can't give it to people who are going to use it for commercial purposes, but that's not due to us, that's due to a specific aspect of one of the data layers we've used. But basically, even then, we just have to have an agreement that is slightly adapted for commercial purposes. So everything is very open at this point. Louis Webb, yes, happy to share the recording. Some of my team have pointed out that the question about pilots is more for WRE than me. Sorry, Rachel. Daniel has said, how have you ground truth the results to make sure the regional categories are still hold when you drill into a specific local area? So we had a long consultation period where we asked people to look through and look at the data and explore it. And we had a lot of people come on and sign the paperwork and get it and play with it. I think in general terms, it's important to think about the level at which a plan is conducted. So if you're conducting it at a county scale, for example, you'll get a different selection of stakeholders looking at it for a different level of use and a different level of accuracy to if you're working at the regional scale. So people who are working at the scale and therefore have the perspective are generally going to speak in more broad terms, which is the purpose of this plan. So we've had this big consultation process, but I fully expect that when we start to drill into the counties, this stuff's going to shift as different things come to the fore and as we have run processes that are designed for ensuring accuracy at those different levels. Luke has asked, what do we think the key differences between this plan and the local nature recovery strategies will be? So this is a really interesting question, and actually one I have a lot of thoughts about, because obviously, so we did this work with DEFRA, and we actually did 3 of the local nature recovery strategy pilots, and we used these methods. So we literally it was a crazy process because we were running the double replanning process about a month to 2 months in advance of the LNRS process for DEFRA, which meant we'd literally do the workshop with you guys, we'd go away, learn some lessons from it, figure out how to make it better, and then put that into the LNRS process. So we had, yes, Thomas, I can see your question, so I'll come to that in a minute. So we were literally learning from this process to create the LNRS process. So the process will be very similar, and that's one laid out by DEFRA. One of the key elements is, like I said, the stakeholder engagement will be quite different. There'll be much more about local stakeholders at the in the LNRS scale. There's also a key role there for political ambition. We've taken the 25-year environment plan, which is quite it's a sort of broad national document, whereas, all right, so Cambridgeshire, for example, has a doubling nature ambition, so fantastic. That means you've got your target set there. So you can take these ambitions that are social, political, whatever they might be, to help guide that. The other key thing about the LNRSs is that the uses will be slightly different. The LNRSs are going to actually, really get into it when they get to the local planning processes, when they get to work with whatever comes out of the new development reforms, land use planning reforms. So I think a key thing, and one of my, in fact, key recommendations for DEFRA is to identify the fact that the LNRSs are going to have multiple different types of use, and they need to be thought about up front so that they're capable of producing the decision support tools required to really make them influential. Thomas Young, I'm so sorry. I started on the chat, which then populated lots of questions. I didn't mean to leave you out. You were indeed first, so I'm sorry about that.
There's a few on there, Sam, in the Q&A that we should address.
Sorry, guys. So Thomas Young has said, we all agree that increasing biodiversity has value, but how do we quantify it? So do we convert it to pounds? Do we look at turn to money? Is there a symbol metric, essentially? So this is actually a really key aspect of SCP, is that we, in my opinion, efforts to create universal metrics, with the possible exception of the DEFRA metric, actually, but that's a whole other story, have generally not been very effective, and that actually converting things to cash amounts often is quite vague. The science behind that isn't that robust. Whereas actually, if we talk about the things we want, so less flooding, more water, more priority habitat, which we know we want, we know, quite clear about that. Alan's already talking about chalk stream headwaters. Like, he's very clear in his mind what he wants. By setting targets for each of those things individually, that means we can identify what it is we want from biodiversity. So we don't it doesn't go through a black box of trying to convert it into a single metric or a pounds or whatever it might be, but rather you go, no, specifically I want this much more flood prevention, water retention, carbon storage, whatever it is. So that's how SCP deals with it. It's a slightly different approach, and it kind of tries to get more at the fundamental things that people want, which makes it easier for stakeholders to understand, easier for stakeholders to guide, and more transparent. Harry Greenfield has said, interested in the stakeholder engagement side of the process and what lessons can be learned for LNRS development. Your ambition for a single plan used by different actors, which I share, will depend on buy-in from all those actors. Do you think you've achieved this, and what are their intentions? Oh wow, what a good question. So this is really interesting. Stakeholder processes are hard. They're difficult. They're difficult for everybody. generally because no one's wrong. It's very rare that stakeholders say things and I'm like, oh, I disagree with that stakeholder. Normally it's a different perspectives on the same thing. So you might have in a few going very reasonably. We're producing very critical amounts of food and providing livelihoods and all these kinds of things, and actually we need to maintain that. Whilst the wildlife trusts might be talking about their carbon storage, and water companies in the air talking about flood prevention. And it's not like anyone's wrong. Everyone's generally got a really good perspective. I've rarely seen stakeholders disagree with. So I think the best way to deal with this is to get it all on the table systematically. In my opinion, one of the things that, and this was actually one of the main things we contributed to the LNRS pilots, was to provide, we took the table, that big table of 945 submissions that we used with WRE, and we adapted that for use within the LNRSs. And that was a really helpful thing. People were really excited about that because it helps make it clear. So you can literally go through and go, so-and-so has emailed me. Here is the verbatim text of their email and how it's been sequestered, how it's been interpreted. And I think having that transparent approach where you get everything logged all together, all the contributions, no matter who it is, no matter what they're saying, it all gets logged in the same place. I think that's a really helpful way of identifying what is it that people are saying, which allows you to identify where the frictions emerge. And one of the things I like about that is it helps you avoid frictions that are unneeded. So sometimes people, dislike each other, often for very good reasons. But if you've got that stuff down in black and white, then it means you're focusing on the issues. And actually what you often find is in many cases, they agree about the vast majority of it. There's just a few kind of key topics. And by going through that process transparently, it allows you, and systematically, it allows you to not get distracted by the stuff that's more perhaps emotive or the surface level things, and actually get to the really key issues. And I think that's something that I'm definitely, has been core in doing the stuff with the Lincolnshire project, for example, was learning from that and making sure that where there were issues that popped up, they were then kind of encapsulated and dealt with on their own. And I'm not saying we got everything right and everything perfect. It's going to be very much a learning experience for a long while. But I think having that transparent, accountable process is what allows these things to kind of get dealt with in a clear way and stop them spiraling. That and a lot of phone calls. I spent a lot of time speaking to a lot of people. I'm talking to them, understanding them, and making sure that they're represented properly, which is, it's a human process. Matt Lowe from Natural England has said, hello Matt, did biodiversify insight any data that could be used as a direct or proxy willingness to participate data layer? As you know, we didn't mention this in the LNRS pilots. Right, so this is also super interesting. Oh my God, I'm running out of time. I'm sorry. So the willingness to participate is really key. So, like Peter identified, who actually wants to do this? You don't want to be forcing this on anyone. There are a number of components that can be used to predict this. There are non-components that can be used to understand this. And I think this is going to be something that's going to be really critical and it's going to evolve over the next few months, years. We can use, so at the moment we're just using cost, which is one thing. But we can, of course, bring in another metric that adjusts this cost based on the likelihood that person's going to have to engage with something. And we can use past behaviors to predict this. So we can use data of who's been involved in agri-environment practices, who's been involved in voluntary work or whatever it might be. We can use this kind of information to adjust this. We could use other kinds of information like, all right, I've been learning a lot recently about the economies of farms, identifying that there are sometimes a farm can have the right number of fields, apologies for my ignorance here, but the right number of fields to their infrastructure, so their tractors and barns, all this other kind of stuff. And actually, if you get that ratio wrong, you end up with ineffective use of land. So there might be information we could use from farmers themselves about whether actually they have the right ratio, and quite frankly they want no business with this natural capital nonsense, or whether they go, actually no, I do have more farms and more fields than I can effectively use. So actually agri-environment would be really helpful for me. So there's all these other kinds of social and economic factors that I'm really keen to start to bring in to develop a willingness to participate layer. And I think one of the key things about this is going to come through practice. So when we actually start to guide money and actually start to invest, it's going to become quite clear quite quickly, I suspect, what determines whether someone's keen or whether someone's not keen. And I think this is going to be something that will have to be developed in parallel through research, but also by bringing together this, like, the actual experience, the actual data on who signed up for stuff. It's a fascinating topic, and I think one that's really key. Tim Papworth has said, in recent sales, the land that's come to market has been purchased by big multinational companies in order to offset their carbon footprint. Can SCP take into account the need of sequester carbon, which might not agree with biological gain objectives? Yeah, so this is a sticky one. Sometimes you get, hopefully, generally, you would get these needs aligned. So you get people restoring nature as it should be done to secure carbon, but there might be instances where you might not do that, where you might plant trees in grassland because you get higher carbon sequestration. Obviously, we can't control multinational companies, but we can indicate to them quite clearly that there are actions here that are best for biodiversity, that are going to give the best biodiversity outcomes. And I think, again, the strength here is the stakeholder engagement. If you've got this thing that a lot of people are getting behind and saying, actually, please don't plant pine forest here, that's going to be a terrible thing from a regional perspective, from a wider perspective. This allows you to start to have the evidence to facilitate those conversations. And again, here, what I'm keen to do is provide people who are doing this stuff, having these conversations with the tools. Of course, we've linked carbon to our the creation of habitats. That's already included within that. But if we can provide something that actually people can use to go, no, please don't plant pine forest there, rather that should be grassland, and here is the evidence for why, then I think that's the best way to engage that. Thomas Young has asked, did you use natural capital methods in Lincolnshire reservoir analysis to find the least bad location? For example, if you have to find 5 kilometre squares of reservoir, how do you trade off strong woodlands versus marshland? So I can't go into that. I'm just trying to think about what I can talk about in the NDA, and I think that's probably a bridge too far. But that will be going public sooner or later, and I think you should ask the question then, because it's a very good one, and I do have a good answer to it. So I'm really sorry to not be able to share it, but I need to respect Anglian Infinity's control of this process.
That's it, Sam. That's all the questions.
Well, there's a few more on the chat now as well. I'll do them until they're done. People can. Darren has said, as the SCP tool has been developed, we've all learnt stuff. I appreciate we can go back to the webinars and the WRE website to remind ourselves of the different steps. I'm wondering if a biodiversified WRE could put together a condensed version and or some kind of guide now that the stage of the work is complete. Yeah, I'd love to do that, actually. That seems really relevant. This is actually something that we've been thinking about a lot. We kind of, to be entirely frank, Biodiversify crashed into the end of last year with a huge number of parallel projects, and right at the end of last year, a large American corporation that I can't name brought out every last remaining hour of my entire team's time for the rest of the year. So last year was absolutely manic, and we've kind of started this year with a bit of a breather and really a desire to think about this stuff and take the time to consolidate on what we've learned, really. And I think that there's a lot to be shared, and I'm really keen that LNRSs are successful. I think there's going to be a lot of people developing a lot of LNRSs different ways, and of course there are other methods under an SCP, and that's entirely their right to do that. But I would love it if we could try to collectively make sure they all work as effectively as possible. And I think that the thing that's interesting here is there's some things that Biodiversify have learned, and some things that WRE have learned, and there's a lot of things that Biodiversity and WRE have learned together. And I'd be really keen to see the stuff brought together, because I know that, from WRE's perspective, Biodiversity, I only see a small portion of what they're doing, and we benefit from the whole picture of it. We benefit from all the work that's been put in by the WRE team to bring the stakeholders together. So I think there's absolutely some opportunity here for making sure that we bring this learning together in a cohesive way, so that natural capital planning in the UK is a rousing success. And part of my interest here as well is the fact that UK is now leading the way in terms of international legislation. It's one of the first well-developed nations highly developed nations to have put biodiversity net gain, and in fact, if not the first, possibly Australia has in some places, but into legislation, which is really important because that means that other countries are likely to follow suit. And if we can make this a real success, this could have massive implications for the rest of the world. And I think that's something that people often forget, is that actually there's this other people are going to be looking to the success of LNRSs beyond people across England. So I'm super keen from a kind of lifelong conservationist perspective to make sure that it succeeds regardless of who's doing it. So I think I would love to do that. That would be great. It's my long answer.
And just to add to that, we're very supportive of that as well, because it's something for our members who are who have inputted into this. But obviously, it's that other question as well of keeping it alive. So yeah, definitely very supportive of that.
Fantastic. And then one last question, which is I think it's the same question from Tim about multinational companies. Jolly good. That's the last one. That's a great one to end on. And then I guess the last thing I'd like to say is thank you very much. This has been an incredible process. I've been so excited to be a part of it, and I think you can probably hear that from the tone of my voice. And it's only really been a success because of the stakeholder engagement. We've had so many people come to these webinars and ask questions and really ask difficult questions, not ask us nice ones, ask actually tell us how's this going to work, which I love. And I think has been really helpful for us to figure out how to do this thing that's never been done before in a way that's actually going to be successful. So I'm really, really grateful to everyone's input and attention and attendance. And I really look forward to carrying on this conversation in the future as things develop.
Is that it, Sam?
I think I'm done. Yeah,
Your
I should
final
probably let
words?
people go and get a cup of tea.
And I'd just like to add a huge thanks as well on behalf of our members as well, but from the team for the the amount of work that's gone into this in the background. So your team, Sam, kind of the unsung heroes, but there's an awful lot of work gone into this, and it's having that opportunity to be the first with something like this in the UK. So I think, yeah, well done. Really pleased with the output. So, but there's lots more to do. So that's good.
Indeed, it is the end of one chapter and the start of another.
Great, thank you. Thanks everyone.
Very much, guys. And we'll have my team has just suggested we might share the outputs in the next couple of days, because then we can share a whole bunch of stuff together. Because we're going to put a new version of everything up on the website. So just to slightly correct my earlier statement.
Perfect.
Super. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks everyone. Have a good afternoon. Bye.
Bye.